They say in the modern world of awakened hunters, your worth is determined by the color of your mana core. If you awaken gold or crimson, you're treated like a modern god. Showered with corporate sponsorships, penthouse suites, and supermodel guildmates. But if you awaken with a gray, dormant null core, well, the system doesn't just label you trash. It ensures you become disposable fuel for the people at the top. That was the harsh reality Arthur Lowell was currently facing as he was hurled face-first onto the jagged floor of a pitch-black dungeon chamber, spitting up mouthfuls of iron and bile. Above him stood Commander Vlad, a towering B-rank vanguard encased in polished titanium alloy armor, casually wiping monster guts off a battle axe that cost more than Arthur's entire family lineage had earned in 3 generations. Surrounding them were 4 senior hunters of the Ironfang Syndicate, all smirking with the cold amusement of predators watching a wounded rat twitch in a corner. "Look at him," Vlad sneered, planting the heavy steel boot of his greaves directly onto Arthur's shattered collarbone with enough pressure to make bones splinter audibly. 19 years old, completely mana dry, and he actually thought we hired him as a paid logistics porter. "Hey, trash, did you really think an F-rank rat was worth 30,000 credits a month?" Arthur clutched at the dirt, blood leaking from his cracked lips. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He simply glared up through matted black hair with eyes that held something far colder than fear. Because Arthur wasn't just a broken teenager from the slums. Locked beneath his skull were the fractured memories of Lucas Vance, the legendary Grand Alchemist who, in an ancient era before modern hunter bureaucracy, decoded the forbidden mechanics of the universe. In his past life, Lucas was burned at the stake by the imperial hegemony because his research didn't rely on their sacred mana crystals. He had discovered the universe was governed by strict mathematical laws. And whoever controlled the laws controlled reality itself. Now, reborn in this frail, malnourished vessel, those memories were violently unlocking beneath the trauma of impending death. "The dungeon boss on this floor is a granite carapace behemoth," Vlad continued, completely oblivious to the ancient storm brewing inside the boy's head. "It's a ranksy mutated terror that hunts by heat and vibrational pulses. We don't have the budget to waste our vanguard's stamina breaking its outer shell, so you're going to be our little noisy bell." Vlad tossed a silver flask at Arthur. It was filled with cheap, volatile Ferox scent bait, a chemical brew so pungent and caustic it was classified as biological waste. "Drink it," Vlad ordered, stepping back toward the reinforced blast doors. "The acid will cook your insides, your vocal cords will shred, and your screaming will draw the behemoth straight out of the fissure into our ambush perimeter. If you try to run, my archers will pin your legs to the stone." The iron blast doors slammed shut with a thunderous mechanical thud, locking Arthur inside the cavernous hollow. From the deep subterranean trenches below, a low, tectonic rumble began to vibrate through the earth. 2 glowing crimson compound, eyes the size of car wheels, ignited in the darkness. The granite behemoth had smelled the meat. Arthur lay in the dirt, his broken body trembling with agonizing weakness. But as he looked at the vial of caustic acid in his palm, a sudden blinding flash of golden runes materialized across his retina. Critical catalyst detected. Imminent vessel extinction. Ancient will recognized. Grand Alchemist Lucas Vance. Synchronizing soul blueprint with the universal fabric. Congratulations. You have unlocked the unique primordial trait, the liquid law engine X-rank. Arthur blinked through the blood in his eyes. A translucent, deep blue interface, entirely distinct from the cheap holographic UI used by standard modern hunters, hummed to life in front of him. The liquid law engine, active. Current tier, Tier 1, Novice Crucible. You no longer brew mundane botanical herbs or raw mana roots. The universe is your alchemical cabinet. Available concepts: kinetic friction, gravitational downforce, thermal excitation. Arthur let out a low, raspy chuckle that quickly turned into a cough. "Modern hunters spend billions on enchanted blades and legendary spellbooks," he muttered, wiping blood from his chin. "All to fight within the rules of the world, without realizing the world is just an equation waiting to be rewritten." ROOO. The cavern walls shuddered as a 6-legged nightmare burst from the floor. The granite behemoth stood 12 feet tall, its massive spiked tail whipping through the air fast enough to break the sound barrier. A normal F-rank porter would have lost their sanity. Arthur didn't even flinch. He picked up the empty glass vial Vlad had tossed at him, focused his consciousness, and extended his palm toward the surrounding air. Extracting concept, kinetic friction. Purity, 99.8% transmuting into liquid medium. Synthesis complete. Vial of absolute zero friction, Tier 1. In Arthur's hand, the dirty glass flask was instantly cleansed, refilled with shimmering, opalescent liquid. That defied gravity, swirling in frictionless perpetual motion. At the exact same moment, Arthur grabbed a handful of jagged stone shrapnel from the floor, channeling his second extraction. Extracting concept, kinetic vector reversal and 100x multiplier, synthesis complete. Vial of rebound force, Tier 1, the behemoth charged. It was an unstoppable avalanche of 15 tons of rock and muscle. Moving at 60 miles per hour, its massive stone horn was aimed squarely at Arthur's chest to turn him into red paste against the wall. 10 meters, 5 meters, 2 meters. At the final split second, Arthur calmly flicked his wrist and shattered the vial of absolute zero friction directly beneath the behemoth's front clawed limbs. What happened next defied every rule of hunter combat. The instant the monster's colossal feet touched the affected floor, all traction ceased to exist. Its 60-mile-per-hour forward momentum didn't transfer into the ground. Instead, its legs instantly slipped outward in a chaotic split, sending the 15-ton apex predator skidding across the obsidian floor like an oversized ice cube on polished glass. The beast roared in absolute panic as its massive weight slammed uselessly into the cavern wall. Entirely unable to push off the ground, its limbs flailing wildly with zero purchase against reality. "Fascinating," Arthur whispered, walking forward with steady, deliberate steps. "No matter how thick your armor is, Newton's laws don't care about your health bar." The monster thrashed, its spiked tail lashing out in a desperate wide sweep aimed at Arthur's waist. The attack was fast enough to split a tank in half. Arthur didn't try to dodge. He simply popped the cork on his second potion, the vial of rebound force, and poured a single drop onto a rusted dagger. Clang. The monster's massive tail struck the tiny rusted blade. Under normal circumstances, the dagger would have shattered into dust and Arthur would have been bifurcated. But the potion's conceptual law took effect instantly. All incoming kinetic force is absorbed, multiplied by 100, and reflected back along the incoming vector. Boom. A shockwave resembling an artillery strike detonated in the center of the cavern. The behemoth's entire tail didn't just deflect, it imploded. The kinetic shock traveled backward through the beast's spine, shattering its thick granite armor into millions of powdery fragments, snapping its vertebrae like dry twigs, and violently launching the 15-ton behemoth 40 feet backward through the air, until it slammed into the reinforced blast doors with the force of a falling meteor. The blast doors warped outward, metal groaning in agony, outside the chamber in the safe monitoring zone. Commander Vlad and his 4 squad members nearly dropped their weapons in sheer disbelief as the heavy steel gate bulged toward them with a deafening crash. "What the hell was that?" one of the mages stammered. Did the boss trigger an enrage phase? The energy spike just went off the charts. "Open the observation hatch," Vlad barked, gripping his battle axe. The kid must have been pulverized instantly. "Be ready to engage the beast." The heavy steel observation slot slid open with a screech. Vlad peered through the reinforced glass, expecting to see a bloody mess of bone and cloth smeared across the floor. Instead, the color completely drained from Vlad's face. The C-rank granite behemoth, the terrifying monster that their entire 5-man strike team had spent weeks preparing to fight, was lying motionless on the floor. Its impenetrable armor pulverized into fine gray dust, its massive body twisted in unnatural angles, completely dead. And standing atop the corpse's crushed skull was Arthur. The supposedly useless, monoless F-rank porter was casually wiping a splash of monster blood from his sleeve. In his left hand, he held an ordinary glass jar that was glowing with an eerie, violet luminescence. As it actively extracted the dying monster's residual mass. Target eliminated, MUTATED granite behemoth rank C, harvesting residual concept. Dense hardness and subterranean weight. Current alchemy essence, 450 units stored user stats synchronizing with catalyst. Strength, 528 agility, 625 constitution, 432 conceptual perception, 1085. Arthur felt the surge of raw conceptual power knit his broken collarbone back together in seconds, his muscles tightening with dense, compressed fiber that surpassed standard hunter physical parameters. He slowly turned his head toward the observation slot, locking eyes with Commander Vlad through the narrow glass window. There was no panic in Arthur's gaze. There was no desperate joy of a survivor. There was only the cold, calculating scrutiny of a master alchemist looking at cheap lab specimens that needed to be dismantled. Arthur walked toward the blast doors, his boots clicking rhythmically against the stone. With every step, the air around him began to warp, light bending unnaturally around his fingertips as he uncorked a freshly synthesized, pitch-black vial. "Commander Vlad," Arthur's voice echoed through the speaker. "You locked the door from the outside to make sure the bait couldn't escape." Arthur raised his hand and pressed the open mouth of the vial directly against the 4-inch thick solid titanium locking mechanism. "Allow me to introduce you to liquid molecular dissolution. In my past life, we called it the solution for people who don't know their place. HISSSSSSSS. The titanium didn't just melt. It disintegrated into absolute vacuum, the heavy steel bolts dissolving like sugar cubes in boiling water. The massive blast doors groaned, and with a single casual push of Arthur's index finger, the 12-ton steel gate collapsed outward onto the floor with a cataclysmic thud, kicking up a massive cloud of gray dust. As the dust cleared, Vlad and his 4 elite hunters stood frozen in place, their weapons trembling in their hands, staring at the monster that had just walked out of the abyss. "Now then," Arthur smiled faintly, his eyes flashing with iridescent cosmic light, "let's discuss my compensation for the overtime." When 12 tons of reinforced titanium collapse onto a stone floor, it doesn't just make a noise, it rattles the teeth in your skull. Through the swirling cloud of gray cement dust, the silhouette of a skinny 19-year-old boy stepped over the crushed metal threshold. Arthur's hands were stuffed casually in the pockets of his torn cargo pants. In his right hand, a single drop of bubbling, violet luminescence rolled along the edge of his thumbnail like a tame drop of mercury. Commander Vlad's brain completely short-circuited. In the official hunter textbooks published by the World Awakening Association, there were 4 basic combat archetypes: vanguards who absorbed kinetic hits, strikers who output raw physical burst, casters who manipulated elementary mana formulas, and supporter alchemists who sat in clean tents miles behind the front lines, mixing powdered monster bone with distilled water. Alchemists didn't walk out of locked boss chambers. Alchemists didn't vaporize 4 inches of solid titanium with a glass vial, and they sure as hell didn't stand on the pulverized skull of a C-rank granite behemoth without a single scratch on their face. "You," Vlad's voice cracked, his grip tightening around the haft of his B-rank enchanted war axe until his knuckles turned pale. "What kind of illegal artifact did you find in that chamber, you little rat? Hand it over. Every scrap of loot in this gate belongs to the Iron Fang Syndicate by contract." Arthur stopped 5 paces from the squad. He tilted his head, his dark eyes glowing with a calm, predatory curiosity. "A contract? You mean the forged insurance agreement, where you plan to report my death as an accidental dungeon hazard while pocketing the 40,000 credit payout from the City Welfare Board?" The 2 archers flanking Vlad flinched. Their fingers twitched over their composite bowstrings, their eyes darting to Vlad for confirmation. They had done this to dozens of nameless F-rank porters over the years. It was standard industry practice for mid-tier syndicates. Hire cheap manual labor from the slums, feed them to high-hazard terrain, and write off their deaths as operational overhead. "Shoot him," Vlad bellowed, realizing that logic had left the room the moment the blast doors fell. "Pin his shoulders to the wall, don't kill him yet, break his knees. Until he tells us where he hid the artifact. THWIP. 2 grade 3 enchanted arrows tipped with armor-piercing tungsten whistled through the air at 400 feet per second, aimed directly at Arthur's kneecaps. To a normal human, the arrows were an invisible blur of death, but to Arthur, whose conceptual perception had reached 85, the physical world didn't move in frames of speed. It moved in visible vectors of kinetic momentum, thermal drag, and air resistance. Arthur didn't even draw a weapon. He simply uncorked a slim, amber-colored vial between his middle and index fingers and flicked 3 tiny droplets into the space in front of his chest. Synthesizing ambient law, liquid viscosity overdrive, transmuting surrounding atmosphere, 50,000x air density increase. The instant the 2 tungsten arrowheads entered the 1-meter bubble around Arthur. The air didn't behave like gas anymore. It behaved like solid, compressed industrial diamond. Clink, clink. The 2 deadly arrows came to a dead, screeching halt midair. Suspended frozen in the invisible density field 2 inches from Arthur's chest. Arthur reached out with his bare fingers, plucked one of the floating arrows from the air. As if taking a pencil from a desk, and snapped the enchanted steel shaft cleanly in half with a crisp, dry snap. "Your vector alignment is sloppy," Arthur noted calmly. Letting the metal shards clatter to the ground. "Too much rotational torque on the fletching. You're bleeding 20% of your kinetic force into drag." The archers backed up 2 full steps. Their boots scraping against the gravel in pure terror. He grabbed an enchanted arrow out of the air with his bare hand. "Die, you freak!" Vlad wasn't a B-rank hunter. Because of his intelligence, he was a B-rank hunter because of his overwhelming physical brute force. Channeling every ounce of crimson mana into his leg muscles, the commander lunged forward. In a high-speed blitz, his battle axe ignited with roaring crimson flames, his signature skill, searing cleave, capable of splitting an armored tank from hood to trunk. The flaming axe came down in an executioner's arc aimed straight at Arthur's neck. Arthur didn't dodge. He simply reached into his coat and produced the small, glowing violet glass container. He had synthesized from the behemoth's corpse. Activating concept, absolute inertial anchor applying to opposing mass, target VLADS war axe. Arthur tapped the flat side of the descending battle axe. With the edge of the glass bottle. The instant the glass made contact with the steel, Vlad's weapon didn't bounce off. Instead, the concept of infinite inertial mass flooded the metal alloy. The 3-pound steel axe head suddenly took on the conceptual weight of a 60-ton locomotive engine. Wham! Vlad's momentum violently betrayed him. The axe didn't hit Arthur. It was yanked downward by the sudden, localized gravitational anomaly with such immense force that it ripped Vlad's arms straight out of their shoulder sockets. Crack. Vlad screamed in agony as his face slammed directly into the stone floor, dragged down by his own weapon. The 60-ton axe buried itself 4 feet deep into the solid granite bedrock, completely pinning Vlad to the ground by his dislocated wrists. No matter how much crimson mana the commander pumped into his muscles, the axe wouldn't budge a fraction of a millimeter. "Gah, my arms, my shoulders," Vlad wailed, spitting blood and broken teeth against the cold rock. "What did you do to my axe? What kind of black magic is this?" Arthur stepped onto the flat of the sunken axe head, looking down at the pinned commander with eyes as cold as deep space. "It's not black magic, Commander," Arthur said softly, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the cavern. "It's basic physics. The problem with modern hunters like you is that you rely so heavily on the system's mana calculations that you forgot the universe has its own rules, and unlike your cheap guild licenses, the universe doesn't negotiate." Arthur crouched down, reaching his hand toward Vlad's neck. Wait, please," Vlad shrieked, all his arrogant bravado instantly evaporating into pathetic sobbing. "I have money, 3 million credits in an unregistered Swiss hunter vault. The key is in my ring. Take the spatial ring, take the entire raid's bounty, just don't kill me." "I was already planning on taking the ring," Arthur replied calmly, with a swift, precise motion. Arthur pressed a single drop of liquid molecular dissolution against the back of Vlad's titanium armor clasp. The corrosive alchemical agent dissolved the metal and entered the nervous system, severing the mana circuits in the commander's spine with surgical precision. Vlad slumped unconscious to the stone, alive, but permanently stripped of his ability to ever channel a single drop of mana. For the rest of his natural life, to an arrogant B-rank hunter who lived on pride, becoming a permanent cripple was a fate far worse than death. Arthur stood up and turned his gaze toward the remaining 4 hunters. The archers and mages dropped their weapons instantly, falling to their knees with their hands raised in the air, trembling so hard their armor rattled like castanets. "The spatial rings," Arthur said, his tone as casual as a cashier asking for receipt confirmation. "Take them off, place them on the floor, then carry your commander out of this dungeon. And tell your guild master that the Black Iron Hollows suffered a catastrophic structural collapse. If I see a single one of your faces in Sector 4 ever again, I won't just dissolve your mana cores, I'll dissolve the oxygen in your lungs." 30 seconds later, the four hunters were scrambling through the dungeon exit portal as fast as their legs could carry them, dragging Vlad's limp body behind them like a sack of wet flour. Arthur stood alone in the quiet cavern, surrounded by the remnants of the cleared dungeon. He picked up the 5 spatial rings left on the floor, using a tiny drop of concept of structural penetration to instantly shatter the monolocks on all of them. Spatial storage accessed. Liquid currency, 4,200,000 credits raw mana stones, 142 units unrefined herbs, 24 bundles forged badges, 5 units. 4 million credits and a mountain of raw materials, Arthur smiled, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Not bad for a morning's work, but cheap herbs and raw mana stones are just baseline fuel if I want to rebuild the primordial crucible and challenge the hegemony. I need rare conceptual anomalies. 2 hours later, Arthur emerged from the dungeon gate into the rain-slicked, neon-lit alleyways of Sector 4, the Rust Ward of New Seoul. Unlike the glittering, crystal-spired skyscrapers of Sector 1, where the S-rank guilds and the billion-dollar alchemist hegemony operated, Sector 4 was a sprawling, lawless sprawl of underground black markets, unregistered pawn shops, and back-alley clinics. Here, disabled hunters who had their mana cores cracked in dungeon raids came to die, and desperate mercenaries bought diluted, bootleg potions just to survive another day. Dominating the center of the district was a massive, 5-story concrete fortress, adorned with the glowing, golden, caduceus crest of Verida's apothecary, the mega-corporation that held an absolute monopoly over all medical and mana supplies. In the Eastern Hemisphere, Arthur pulled the hood of a dark leather trench coat over his head, slipping through the crowded bazaar toward the underground level of the Shadow Exchange, the infamous black market auction house where forbidden artifacts and unregistered dungeon loot were traded away from government eyes. Inside the dimly lit basement lounge of the exchange, the air was thick with the smell of cheap tobacco, dried monster blood, and stale medicinal alcohol. At the center of a private VIP booth, surrounded by 3 heavily armed bodyguards, sat a woman whose appearance made the entire room keep a respectful distance. Her name was Elena Cross, the 24-year-old former guildmaster of the once legendary Silver Dawn, once heralded as the most promising A-rank frost spellblade in the nation. She was now pale, gaunt, and wrapped in thick wool blankets despite the warm room. Black, spider-web-like veins pulsed visibly across her neck, creeping toward her jawline, the unmistakable, fatal symptom of Level 5 abyssal mana rot. Across from her stood a smug, silk-robed representative from Verida's apothecary, wearing a diamond-encrusted alchemist pin on his lapel. "I'm sorry, Lady Cross," the Verida's representative sneered, swirling a tiny, glowing crimson vial between his fingers with oily satisfaction. "Our Grand Master's Tier 4 Divine Purging Draft is extremely difficult to brew. It takes 3 months of continuous mana condensation. If you want this single 10 ml dosage, which will only delay your rot by 2 weeks, the price is 12 million credits, plus the mineral mining rights to Silver Dawn's remaining Grade A dungeon gate." Elena's bodyguards reached for their swords, their knuckles turning white. "You blood-sucking parasites! That gate is the only thing keeping the families of our fallen members fed. You're extorting a dying woman." The Verida's merchant didn't even flinch. "Supply and demand, gentlemen. Verida's holds the exclusive patent on purging elixirs. If Lady Cross doesn't drink this within 48 hours, the rot will reach her brain stem, and she will transform into an abyssal ghoul. So, do we have a deal, or should I take my merchandise elsewhere?" Elena closed her eyes, her trembling fingers reaching toward the contract on the table. I have no choice. The guild, my life. Don't sign it," a calm, clear voice cut through the smoky room. "Unless you enjoy paying 12 million credits for a bottle of glorified sugar water, mixed with diluted troll bile." The entire VIP lounge went dead silent. The bodyguards drew their blades, the Veritas merchant turned purple with rage, and Alina looked up through glazed, feverish eyes. As Arthur stepped out of the shadows, "Who let this filthy slum brat in here?" the Veritas representative shrieked, pointing an accusatory finger at Arthur. "Security, cut out his tongue and throw him into the gutter." Two C-rank enforcers lunged toward Arthur, but Arthur didn't even look at them. He casually reached into his trench coat, pulled out a plain, unbranded, triangular glass flask filled with a swirling, pitch-black liquid. That seemed to actively swallow the ambient light in the room and set it down on Alina's table with a soft clink. "What is the meaning of this?" the Veritas merchant barked. "Are you trying to peddle fake street toxins in front of an official Veritas licensed practitioner?" Arthur looked directly into Alina's fading blue eyes, ignoring the merchant completely. "That Veritas potion won't cure you," Arthur explained, his voice carrying the effortless authority of an ancient master scholar. "Abyssal mana rot isn't a bacterial infection or a standard mana poison. It is an entropic curse that accelerates the concept of cellular decay. Veritas sells you temporary suppressants because curing you means losing a recurring 12 million credit customer." Arthur tapped the glass flask on the table. "Inside this vial is something the alchemist hegemony claims is mathematically impossible. It is a Tier 1 conceptual extraction, liquid reversal of biological entropy. It doesn't fight the rot. It inverts the decay vector into raw cellular regeneration. Drink it, and within 10 seconds, the black veins on your neck will dissolve into pure mana." "Lies, absolute madness," the Veritas merchant laughed hysterically. "Reversing entropy in an open alchemical solution violates the third universal law of mana conservation. Even an S-rank Grand Alchemist would suffer severe mana rebound trying to stabilize such an equation. If she drinks that uncertified garbage, her heart will explode." Alina looked at the smirking Veritas merchant, then looked at the calm, unwavering eyes of the young man standing before her. She was already at death's door. She had nothing left to lose. "Lady Cross, no," her head bodyguard pleaded. "We don't know what's in that flask." "I'm already dead in 2 days anyway, Marcus," Alina whispered weakly. With a trembling hand, Alina picked up Arthur's plain glass flask, popped the simple cork stopper, and swallowed the entire pitch-black brew in a single gulp. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Veritas merchant crossed his arms and grinned maliciously. "See, a useless parlor trick from a street BA dump." A heartbeat like the strike of a war drum echoed through the entire VIP lounge. A brilliant, blinding pillar of pure cerulean light erupted from Alina's chest, blasting the dark smoke out of the room in an instant. The black, necrotic veins across her throat and face didn't just fade. They actively unraveled, dissolving into shimmering motes of golden light as her pale skin regained a radiant, porcelain flush. "Concept applied. Absolute cellular reversal target mana core. 100% purified abyssal rot. Completely eradicated." Alina opened her eyes. The feverish glaze was gone, replaced by the razor-sharp, freezing radiance of an apex frost spellblade. She took a deep, effortless breath of air, her mana aura bursting outward with such violent force that the Veritas merchant was knocked clean off his chair, sprawling onto the floor in utter terror. My mana circuits," Alina whispered, looking at her glowing hands in sheer, unadulterated shock. "They aren't just healed, they're twice as wide as before." She snapped her head toward Arthur, her breath catching in her throat. Who are you?" Arthur smiled faintly, resting his hand on the back of the leather booth. "Just an independent pharmacist," Arthur said calmly. "And starting today, Veritas Apothecary no longer has a monopoly in this city." The moment Alina Cross's cerulean frost aura settled back into her veins, the atmosphere in the Shadow Exchange VIP lounge shifted from desperate dread to absolute suffocating authority. The Veritas Apothecary representative was on his hands and knees, clawing backward across the hardwood floor like a terrified crab. The smug arrogance that had defined his entire career had dissolved into hyperventilating hysteria. "Impossible! Impossible!" the merchant squeaked, his manicured fingers trembling as he pointed at Alina's flawless, glowing skin. "Abyssal mana rot is a terminal biological curse. The Grand Master himself proved it mathematically at the Geneva Alchemical Summit. You're a demon. You've used blood sacrifice." I'll have the Hunter Enforcement Bureau raid this entire sector. Arthur didn't even turn his head. He reached onto the table, picked up an empty crystal tumbler, and tilted his wrist. Extracting ambient concept. Acoustic pressure, synthesis complete. Vial of reverberating silence, Tier 1. With a lazy flick of his thumb, Arthur shattered the small glass bead against the floor directly in front of the crawling merchant. POW. The merchant opened his mouth to scream, but the air around his throat completely collapsed. No matter how violently his vocal cords vibrated, the conceptual silence swallowed every decibel of sound, rendering his frantic threats completely mute. "You're making too much noise in an establishment where people come to conduct business," Arthur said calmly, stepping over the silently thrashing merchant. He looked at Alina's 3 bodyguards, who were still standing frozen with their mouths agape, their swords held loosely in numb fingers. "I suggest you escort this gentleman to the dumpster behind the building. And make sure he takes his 12 million credit sugar water with him." "Right away, sir." Marcus, the head bodyguard, bowed with so much respect his forehead nearly grazed his knees. 10 seconds earlier, he would have killed Arthur for trespassing. Now, he looked at the 19-year-old boy like he was the second coming of the Creator. Within moments, the room was cleared. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, and Alina stood before Arthur. The former A-rank Frost Spellblade, known throughout the entire nation as the untouchable Ice Sovereign of New Soul, slowly sank to one knee, lowering her silver-haired head in absolute fealty. "My life, my blade, and the entirety of the Silver Dawn Guild belong to you," Alina said, her voice steady and ringing with unshakable conviction. "Name your price. If you want our remaining dungeon gates, our vaults, or every drop of blood in my body, it is yours." "Get up," Arthur said, taking a seat on the leather sofa and pouring himself a glass of cold water. "I don't need your blood, Lady Cross, and I don't need your gold. What I need is infrastructure." Arthur leaned forward, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering neon lights of Sector 4. "Verida's apothecary and the Grand Alchemist Hegemony have spent 3 centuries convincing humanity that potions are rare, expensive, and limited by biological toxicity. They control the prices, they control who lives and dies in the dungeons, and they hoard the world's wealth. While feeding the slums diluted scraps, I intend to dismantle their entire monopoly by the end of this month." Alina's heart leaped in her chest. "How?" "Veritas has 30,000 licensed alchemists, sovereign military backing, and the direct protection of the 5 great guilds. They have 30,000 alchemists who rely on boiling weeds in brass pots," Arthur replied with a cold, predatory smirk. "I have the laws of the universe, but when Veritas realizes their golden goose has been cured, they won't send lawyers. They will send executioners, and that's where you come in." If you're enjoying Arthur's ruthless rise from the trash pits to dismantling the corrupt alchemist monopoly, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment down below, letting me know your favorite impossible potion concept, and subscribe to Fate Library with all notifications turned on. We've got hours of non-stop, overpowered progression fantasy coming your way. So don't miss a single drop. 12 hours later, deep inside the subterranean industrial district of Sector 4, Arthur stood in the center of an abandoned concrete warehouse that had once belonged to a bankrupt steel refinery. Alina and her 12 most loyal, veteran Silver Dawn hunters stood guard at every perimeter entrance, their weapons freshly polished, and their mana cores humming with renewed vitality. In the center of the warehouse floor, Arthur wasn't using expensive cauldrons, rune-inscribed alembics, or platinum-stirring rods. He was standing before a simple $2 glass pitcher, with 20 empty soda bottles arranged in a geometric circle around him. The liquid law engine, operational, current conceptual essence, 1,200 units, harvested from black market mana stones. Available atmospheric principles, gravitational pull, thermal agitation, probabilistic distribution. Initiating advanced synthesis, Tier 2 forbidden formulas. Arthur closed his eyes and extended both palms toward the ceiling. Standard alchemists believe that when a blade strikes armor, the damage is determined by the wielder's strength stat and the blade's enchantment, Arthur whispered, his voice resonating with ancient cosmic harmonics. They call a critical strike luck, but luck isn't magic. Luck is merely a probability waveform waiting to be collapsed. Extracting abstract concept, probabilistic criticality, isolating 100% fatal frequency from quantum mana field. Condensing into liquid medium, synthesis complete. 5x vials of absolute divine criticality, Tier 2, in Arthur's hands. 5 clear glass bottles filled with an electric, blinding gold nectar that crackled with miniature lightning bolts. Effect. When poured over any weapon or consumed by a striker, every single physical and magical attack for the next 180 seconds is mathematically guaranteed to hit the exact structural weak point of the target, dealing a flat 1000% true critical damage that bypasses all armor and defensive barriers. Next, Arthur gathered the ambient thermal and gravitational energy radiating from the industrial blast furnaces below the concrete floor. Extracting natural law, gravitational compression, and mass warp, synthesis complete. 3x vials of bottled gravitational singularity, Tier 2. The liquid inside these 3 spherical vials was so dense, so terrifyingly dark, that the surrounding glass actively warped inward. Holding the vial felt like holding a miniature collapsing star. Before Arthur could synthesize his third formula, the heavy steel skylights of the warehouse shattered into a billion glittering shards. Crash, crash, crash. 20 figures clad in matte black tactical armor and hooded cloaks descended on wire cables from the ceiling, landing in perfect combat formation across the perimeter. Each assassin wielded twin vibrating alloy daggers coated in sickly green neurotoxins, and their chest plates bore the private, crimson skull insignia of the Black Hound Inquest, Veritas, Apothecary's personal wetwork assassination division. Leading them was Executioner Thorn, a notorious S-rank dark stalker whose name alone caused entire guilds to surrender their territory. Thorn's eyes were completely black, modified with artificial monolenses that tracked heat. And biological signatures. Well, Thorn's voice rasped like 2 rusted iron plates grinding together. Vice Chairman Morgan was right. The little rat from Sector 9 really did find a heretical recipe. And he even managed to patch up the crippled Ice Princess. Thorn pointed the tip of his jagged obsidian blade directly at Arthur's throat. The alchemist hegemony does not permit unauthorized medicine to exist, boy. You have 2 choices. Surrender your soul and sign an eternal alchemical slave contract with Veritas, or watch as my hounds flay Lady Cross alive before we dissect your brain in our research basement. Elena stepped in front of Arthur, her frost blade igniting with a chilling sub-zero blizzard aura. You won't lay a finger on him, Thorn? Lady Cross, Thorn laughed, a sound dripping with condescending pity. You were an A-rank before you got sick. I have butchered 30 A-ranks this year alone. My men are coated in anti-mana resin. Your frost magic won't even penetrate their cloaks. Hounds, butcher the guards, leave the boy's hands and head intact. 20 elite assassins vanished from sight in an instant, activating shadow step to appear directly behind the Silver Dawn guards. Their poisoned daggers aimed at 12 exposed throats. Drink, Arthur said calmly from behind Elena, not even flinching. He tossed one of the golden vials of absolute divine criticality to Elena, and shattered another 3 across the floor beneath the feet of the Silver Dawn guards. Elena didn't hesitate for a microsecond. She uncorked the vial with her teeth, swallowed the crackling golden nectar in a single gulp, and swung her standard steel rapier in a wide, sweeping horizontal slash. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary rapier swinging through the air against 20 S-rank stealth cloaks coated in anti-mana resin would have done 0 damage, but the universe's probability engine had just been rewritten. SCHWNGGGGG? A blinding, crescent wave of pure golden geometric geometry erupted from the tip of Elena's sword. The attack didn't care about stealth. It didn't care about distance. It didn't care about anti-mana armor. The mathematical concept of absolute 1000% critical damage locked onto the exact atomic microscopic weak points of every single piece of armor in the room. Splurt, splurt, splurt. In a fraction of a second, the high-grade armor of 8 elite assassins was sliced cleanly in half along their waistlines like wet parchment. 8 top-tier Veritas killers dropped to the concrete floor in spray of crimson, their enchanted cloaks failing to stop a single millimeter of the strike. What? Thorn screamed, leaping backward onto a steel catwalk in utter terror. his artificial black eyes flashing wildly with error warnings. That sword isn't even enchanted. How did a basic physical swing bypass grade 4 anti-mana resin? I told you, Arthur's voice echoed through the warehouse. Calm, relaxed, and chillingly confident as he walked toward the center of the kill zone. Your resin resists mana, but it doesn't resist the structural reality of being broken. Arthur pulled the small spherical vial containing the bottled gravitational singularity from his pocket. You like looking down on people from high places, Thorn? Let's fix your altitude. Arthur hurled the tiny glass sphere straight up toward the ceiling rafters where Thorn was perched. The vial shattered against the iron beam. KABOO. The instant the glass broke, 3 tons of localized gravitational mass detonated into existence. A pitch-black sphere of absolute crushing gravity, the size of a basketball, expanded at the ceiling, pulling every loose object in the warehouse toward its center with terrifying velocity. Steel beams groaned, iron girders bent like rubber, and Thorn, the unstoppable S-rank assassin, was violently sucked backward into the ceiling, his ribs snapping like dry matchsticks as 40 GS of gravitational pressure pinned his entire body flat against the iron roof. GRAGH, MYBONES, MY lungs, shut IT off, shut IT OFFFFF. Thorn shrieked, coughing up clouds of blood as his armor was crushed flat into his chest plate. The remaining 12 assassins were paralyzed with horror. They had fought dragons, cleared S-rank dimensional rifts, and assassinated government officials. But they had never seen a teenager wipe out an entire elite strike force. Using 2 glass bottles and 0 mana incantations, Arthur stood beneath the screaming assassin pinned to the ceiling, casually dusting off the sleeve of his coat. "Elena," Arthur said softly. "Yes, Master Arthur," Elena replied, standing at his side, her blade still humming with golden critical energy. "Take 5 of your men and secure the Veritas distribution depot in Sector 3, Arthur commanded, his eyes gleaming with sharp ambition. "By sunrise tomorrow, I want every warehouse, every shipment of raw glass, and every medical distribution terminal in this city under Silver Dawn's name. If anyone from the hegemony tries to intervene." Arthur looked up at Thorn, who had finally passed out from the crushing gravity, his body dangling like a broken puppet from the bent steel beams. "Tell them the cursed alchemist is opening shop." In the modern history of New Seoul, the line between Sector 1 and Sector 4 was not marked by a physical wall. It was marked by the price of a single bottle of medicine. In Sector 1, corrupt S-rank guild leaders and corporate executives bought golden ambrosia vials for 3 million credits a pop, curing hangovers, wrinkles, and minor muscle strains like sparkling water. Meanwhile, in Sector 4, disabled veterans and sick children sold their family heirlooms just to buy watered-down goblin antiseptic that had a 50% chance of causing liver failure. That century-old empire of extortion ended on a Tuesday morning at precisely 8 o'clock, at the main intersection of Sector 4's Central Plaza, directly beneath the looming shadow of the abandoned Veritas supply depot. A massive 30-foot hand-painted banner unfurled across the concrete facade. It bore no guild logos. It carried no government stamps. It simply read, "The Underground Apothecary, Medicine for Humanity. Complete Abyssal Detox Elixir, 500 credits. 100% Guaranteed Broken Bone Restoration, 300 credits. Mana Core Microfracture Sealant, 1,000 credits. By 9 o'clock, the line of desperate hunters. Tearful mothers and crippled porters stretched for 9 city blocks. Sitting behind a simple wooden folding table in the center of the depot was Arthur Lowell, wearing a plain black hoodie. With his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, arranged in neat, glowing rows in front of him were hundreds of small, standardized glass vials filled with shimmering conceptual extractions. Next to him stood Elena Cross, her silver hair tied back in a high ponytail, personally handing out vials and verifying identity cards to make sure no corporate scalpers bought out the inventory. "Next," Arthur called out, his voice calm and steady. A middle-aged man with a prosthetic iron leg and a scarred, blinded left eye hobbled forward, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold his identification card. His name was Park D-Sung, a retired C-rank vanguard whose knee had been shattered by an armored wyvern 5 years ago. "Son, is this a joke?" Disung stammered, his eyes welling with tears as he looked at the 300 credit price tag on the bone restoration tonic. I've been in debt for 5 years trying to pay Veritas for bone growth injections. They told me my knee was permanently necrotic. Arthur took Disung's cracked, calloused hand. Feeling the twisted, shattered bone fragments beneath the scarred skin, analyzing target biology, extracting conceptual fracture VECTORS, applying Tier 1 catalyst, cellular architectural blueprint. Arthur handed the man a small, emerald green vial. Drink half, pour the other half directly over your kneecap, and don't call me son, call me the guy putting Veritas out of business. Disung popped the cork and poured the green liquid over his ruined knee. The reaction was instantaneous. Crack, crack, crack. A golden, mathematical lattice of light enveloped Disung's leg. The twisted, calcified bone fragments dissolved and realigned in 3 seconds flat. The dead nerves ignited with electric warmth, and the scarred, sunken tissue swelled with thick, healthy muscle fiber. Disung let out a sharp gasp, dropping his wooden crutch to the floor with a loud clatter. He took 1 step, then 2 steps, then in front of 5,000 screaming onlookers. In the plaza, the 50-year-old crippled veteran leaped 3 feet into the air, landed with perfect balance, and collapsed to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. I can walk, it's a miracle, the underground pharmacy cured me. The crowd in the plaza erupted into a deafening roar of cheers, tears, and applause. Within 3 hours, all 4,000 bottles of Arthur's conceptual medicine were completely sold out. Videos of the impossible cures shot to the #1 trending spot on HunterTube, garnering 30 million views in less than 6 hours. The stock price of Veritas Apothecary dropped 17% in a single trading session, causing complete panic across the financial district. Meanwhile, at the apex of Sector 1, inside the floating glass citadel known as the Alchemical Hegemony Tower, the mood was the exact opposite of a celebration. In the opulent, velvet-lined grand boardroom on the 100th floor, 12 high-ranking Grand Alchemists sat around an obsidian conference table. At the head of the table sat Vice Chairman Morgan, smashing his golden tablet onto the polished marble with enough force to shatter the display screen into powder. 4,000 unregistered black market potions distributed in broad daylight, Morgan roared, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Our distributors in Sector 3 and 4 have reported an 80% cancellation rate on all recurring medical contracts. And Thorn, where the hell is Thorn and the Black Hound inquest? The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open, and 2 junior mages dragged a large, hovering medical gurney into the room. Lying on the gurney was Thorn, or what was left of him. The terrifying S-rank assassin was wrapped in head-to-toe plaster casts, his artificial eyes fried to ash, and his spine held together by temporary steel pins. Morgan, Thorn coughed weakly, spitting up flecks of blood through a breathing mask. He isn't an alchemist. He doesn't use herbs. He throws pieces of the universe. The room went dead silent. Sitting at the far end of the table, an old man with long, snow-white robes, a braided silver beard, and 9 golden rings adorning his fingers slowly opened his piercing amber eyes. This was Grand Master Cassius, the 9th Circle Supreme Chancellor of the Hegemony, the very man who, 500 years ago, had condemned Lucas Vance to the execution pyre. Cassius looked at the chemical readouts on the tablet, his ancient eyes narrowing with cold, calculating recognition. Dissolved molecular bonds, inverted entropy, 0 friction vectors, Cassius whispered, his voice sending a shiver through the room. I recognize this filth. 5 centuries ago, a madman named Lucas Vance claimed the universe had no gods, only equations. I burned his body and scattered his ashes to the solar winds. It seems his heretical ghost has crawled into the body of an F-rank orphan. Cassius stood up, his 9th circle mana aura flaring, with enough oppressive heat that the air in the boardroom began to singe. Deploy the Sovereign Flame Legion, Cassius commanded coldly. Take the 300 artificial homunculi infused with ancient salamander dragon bile. Go to Sector 4, level the entire district to gray ash, incinerate every man, woman, and child who touched his medicine, and bring me the boy's head in a jar. By midnight, the sky over Sector 4 turned a terrifying, apocalyptic shade of blood orange. The ground began to shake with the synchronized footsteps of 308-foot-tall, armored homunculi marching through the industrial gates. Each construct was forged from indestructible black iron, their chest cavities glowing with internal thermonuclear fire that burned at 4,000 degrees Celsius. Leading the Legion were 3/8 Circle Imperial Pyromancers, hovering on platforms of roaring dragon flame. "Citizens of Sector 4, the lead pyromancer's voice amplified across the district like a thunderclap. "By order of the Grand Alchemical Hegemony, this sector is declared a biohazard quarantine zone due to heretical contamination. All life within the perimeter will now be purified by divine fire." The 300 homunculi raised their heavy cannon arms, charging their Dragon Ball cores. Millions of liters of liquid hellfire began to pool at the barrels, ready to turn the entire residential ward into an ocean of boiling glass. Thousands of terrified families huddled in their homes, clutching their children and praying for salvation. Elena Cross stood at the perimeter barricade, her frost blade drawn, her teeth clenched so hard they bled. "We can't stop 300 Dragonfire constructs. The heat alone will melt our swords before we get within 10 meters. "You don't need to stop them," a calm, familiar voice said from behind her. Arthur walked past the barricade, his hands resting in his pockets, stepping out into the no-man's land between the barricade and the advancing army of mechanical monsters. "Hey, kid," the lead pyromancer laughed hysterically from his hovering platform. "Are you the little slum doctor who thinks he's a god? Look around you. This is the supreme fire of the 9th Circle. Your cheap glass bottles won't even last a millisecond in this heat. You talk a lot for a man who doesn't understand the first law of thermodynamics," Arthur replied, pulling a single, deep azure crystal flask from his inner coat pocket. Inside the flask, the liquid was so impossibly cold that the space around the glass was actively forming miniature geometric snowflakes that hovered, defying gravity. The liquid law engine, overdrive, synthesizing conceptual masterpiece. Tier 3 primordial law extracted universal constant, absolute 0 minus 273. 15 degrees C/0 Kelvin, concept. Complete cessation of all molecular kinetic motion. "Let me teach you an elementary lesson," Arthur said, taking the cork off the flask with his thumb. "Fire is not an element. Fire is merely the rapid vibration of excited molecules reacting with oxygen. And what happens when you tell those molecules to stop moving?" Arthur poured the entire azure liquid into the palm of his hand, crouched low, and slammed his bare palm flat onto the concrete pavement. "Activating liquid concept of absolute 0, radius, 500 meters target, all exothermic energy, SHHHHHH-clack." A silent, blinding ring of pale cyan frost exploded across the ground at the speed of light. It didn't create ice chunks. It didn't summon a snowstorm. It simply deleted heat from reality. The 4,000-degree dragon fire inside the 300 homunculi didn't just extinguish. The nuclear reactions in their cores instantly froze solid into dark, brittle carbon glass. The 3/8 Circle pyromancers hovering in the air watched in absolute horror as their flaming platforms dissolved into cold mist. Gravity reclaimed them, and all 3 grand mages fell 20 feet, crashing face first into the freezing concrete with a painful thud. Creak! Snap! The 308-foot-tall iron homunculi froze mid-stride, their glowing eyes dimming into pitch-black void. The absolute lack of molecular motion caused their indestructible black iron armor to become so ridiculously brittle that a light breeze blowing through the street caused 30 of the colossal constructs to snap at the waist, collapsing into piles of blue crystalline shards. "My fire!" the lead pyromancer gasped, clawing at his throat, his breath coming out in white clouds of dry ice. "My 8th Circle mana! It's 0 degrees Kelvin. The mana itself has frozen in my veins." Arthur walked through the field of shattered iron statues, his boots crunching rhythmically over the frozen remains of the hegemony's greatest military force. He stopped directly in front of the crawling pyromancer, looking down with cold, unyielding disdain. "Tell Grand Master Cassius that his flames are as weak and arrogant as they were 500 years ago," Arthur whispered, his voice like freezing steel. "And tell him, I'm coming to the Hegemony Tower to collect my execution refund." When 300 elite Dragonfire constructs and 3/8 Circle Imperial Pyromancers, are turned into frozen glass statues by a 19-year-old in a hoodie. Word travels fast. By dawn, the news had shattered the internet. Videos recorded by the citizens of Sector 4 were replayed across global broadcast networks on an endless loop. For 300 years, the common people of the world were taught that the Grand Alchemist hegemony was an untouchable celestial institution, that their golden robes, platinum cauldrons, and multi-million credit price tags were the divine will of the system. Now they saw the truth. A kid from the slums had shattered their invincible army with a single bottle of cold liquid. In the streets of New Seoul, an unprecedented wave of rebellion swept through the districts. 10,000 disabled hunters, independent mercenary squads, and oppressed porters marched. Out of the rust-covered alleys of Sector 4 and Sector 3, converging at the golden perimeter gates of Sector 1, the Crystal District. Leading the vanguard was Elena Cross, her frost blade drawn, riding at the head of a motorized armored column of silver dawn vehicles. And walking calmly at the center of the army, surrounded by floating, iridescent glass spheres that orbited his fingertips like miniature planets, was Arthur Lowell. "Master Arthur," Elena said, pulling her tactical rover to a halt next to him. "The hegemony has activated the heavenly Aegis barrier around the entire 100-story citadel. It's powered by 50 S-rank Manga cores linked directly to the city's tectonic power grid. The military estimates it can withstand 3 consecutive direct nuclear detonations." Arthur looked up at the towering, kilometer-tall glass skyscraper dominating the skyline. A shimmering dome of iridescent purple force fields enveloped the entire structure. Humming with enough raw magical radiation that birds flying overhead were instantly disintegrated into blue sparks. Arthur smiled faintly, reaching into his leather bandolier and unhooking a slender, pitch-black glass tube filled with a liquid so still it looked like frozen oil. "Nuclear weapons rely on kinetic shockwaves and thermal expansion," Arthur said, tossing the black tube lightly in his palm. "If you throw 1 billion tons of force against a wall, the wall absorbs the force. But what happens when you introduce a chemical that deletes the concept of atomic cohesion? The liquid law engine, Tier 4 transcendence, current conceptual essence, 8,500 units, harvested from 300 frozen homunculi cores. Synthesized masterpiece, vial of structural collapse, Tier 4. A mechanism. When shattered on any continuous energetic or physical surface, the molecular bonds holding the structure together lose their electromagnetic attraction, causing instant geometric dissolution." Arthur casually walked up to the 5-foot-thick shimmering purple barrier. Thousands of armed hegemony enforcers stationed behind the force field laughed mockingly through the intercoms. "Look at him. The slum brat thinks he can touch an S-rank Aegis field. The moment his skin touches the purple lightning, his flesh will be cooked to the bone." Arthur didn't touch the barrier with his skin. He simply raised the black tube, tapped the glass against the exterior frequency of the purple shield, and let a single microscopic droplet seep into the barrier's outer matrix. DIP. For half a second, the purple barrier flared with blinding golden runes. Then, a sound like a million panes of thin sugar glass snapping simultaneously ripped through the district. KRKRKRSHATTRRRRR. The invincible heavenly Aegis field. The multi-billion credit nuclear-grade barrier that had protected the hegemony for a century didn't just drop. It actively disintegrated into a glittering, harmless rain of purple dust. That drifted onto the pavement like confetti. The 50 S-rank Manga cores inside the Citadel's basement simultaneously overloaded, short-circuiting every electronic display, security turret, and defense grid in the entire 100-story skyscraper in less than 2 seconds. The 10,000 hunters standing behind Arthur stared in stunned, breathless silence. Then Elena raised her sword toward the sky and roared at the top of her lungs. "For the open pharmacy, charge!" A tidal wave of 10,000 hunters surged through the broken gates, overwhelming the panic-stricken hegemony guards like an unstoppable flood. While the Silver Dawn and the revolutionary hunters secured the lower 80 floors, Arthur took the private executive elevator directly to the 100th floor presidential sky lounge. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The grand penthouse suite was a masterpiece of decadent luxury. White marble floors imported from Italian dungeon rifts, solid gold chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering a panoramic view of the entire burning city below. Standing in the center of the room was Vice Chairman Morgan. His expensive Italian suit was torn to shreds. His eyes were bloodshot and wild with crazed, drug-fueled desperation, and in his right hand he clutched a glowing, pulsing crimson syringe. Filled with a thick bioluminescent fluid, "You ruined everything," Morgan shrieked, his voice cracking with sheer madness. "My billions, my stock options, my board seats. The Grand Master ordered me to clean up this mess, and I'm going to tear your head off with my bare teeth," without waiting for a response. Morgan jammed the 4-inch needle directly into his own jugular vein and depressed the plunger. "Alert! Target has injected SSS rank forbidden forgery, nectar of the dragon god. Massive biological mutation in progress. ROOOAR. Morgan's spine violently arched backward as his muscles tore through his skin, swelling to 4 times their natural volume. Thick, obsidian dragon scales sprouted across his chest and arms. His fingers fused into 6-inch razor talons, and a pair of leathery, burning demonic wings burst from his shoulder blades. His raw combat power surged from an ordinary administrative C rank straight into the realm of an apex SSS rank chimera behemoth. The sheer pressure of Morgan's mutated aura cracked the marble floor beneath his feet, shattering the penthouse windows into a hurricane of flying glass. "Feel this power, you slum rat," the monstrous chimera Morgan bellowed, his voice vibrating with double-layered demonic frequencies. "I have consumed the blood of an ancient WYRM. My speed exceeds sound. My strength shatters mountains. What does your stupid human logic have against a living god?" Morgan flexed his massive talons and disappeared. He didn't just run, he moved at Mach 4. The sonic boom inside the enclosed penthouse was loud enough to burst a human eardrum instantly. A blur of razor-sharp dragon claws came hurtling toward Arthur's face, carrying enough kinetic energy to level a 4-story apartment building. To an outside observer, Arthur was already dead. The attack was too fast for human nerve synapses to process. Arthur didn't even blink. He reached into his sleeve, popped the wax seal off a shimmering, iridescent silver vial, and poured the contents directly into his mouth. Activating Tier 4 conceptual extraction, distilled 5-second temporal stutter, collapsing localized CHRONO vector to 0. The universe has paused for 5 seconds. User is granted absolute sovereign freedom. Tick. A soft, metallic clock chime resonated through the fabric of space. In an instant, the entire world turned into a frozen, black-and-white photograph. The shards of shattered glass floating in the air hung perfectly motionless like suspended diamonds. The roaring sonic boom was frozen in midair as a visible, crystalline shockwave ring, and Morgan's terrifying dragon claws were paused 2 inches from Arthur's nose. His saliva suspended as frozen droplets in front of his fangs. "Speed exceeds sound," Arthur whispered, casually stepping sideways out of the trajectory of the claws. He looked at his watch. 4.2 seconds remaining. Arthur walked slowly around the frozen chimera monster, inspecting its anatomy with the dispassionate curiosity of a senior surgeon looking at a biological cadaver. "You injected raw dragon bile without stabilizing the peptide receptors," Arthur critiqued, tapping Morgan's frozen dragon scales with his fingernail. "Your heart rate is 450 beats per minute. Your aortic valve is undergoing severe mechanical fatigue, and your center of mass is tilted 45 degrees forward because you don't know how to balance wing weight." 2.8 seconds remaining. Arthur pulled out 3 simple wooden acupuncture needles from his pocket, dipping their tips into a small vial of liquid conceptual friction removal. With 3 swift, precise taps, Arthur inserted the needles into Morgan's left knee joint, his right hip socket, and the base of his cranial mana circuit. 1 second remaining. Arthur stepped back, leaned against the executive oak desk, crossed his arms, and waited. 0 seconds. TOCK, temporal continuum restored. The world exploded back into full, roaring color and sound. Morgan's Mach 4 strike slammed into empty air where Arthur had been standing a microsecond earlier. Because of the absolute zero friction Arthur had applied to his joints, the monster's colossal forward momentum had nowhere to dissipate. SKRRRRR crash. Morgan's legs slipped violently out from under him. His knee joint inverted with a sickening snap, and his 60-ton forward mass carried him skidding wildly across the slick marble floor. Like an oversized bowling ball, crashing straight through the exterior glass wall and dangling precariously over the 1,000-foot drop above the city streets. What? Where did he go? How did he move? Morgan shrieked, flailing his wings in panic as he tried to claw his way back onto the balcony. Arthur stood above him, looking down with cold, calculating amusement. "You asked what human logic has against a living god," Arthur said, pressing the sole of his boot against Morgan's clawed fingers. "The answer is simple. A god still has to obey math." Arthur pushed his boot down. "No!" With a desperate, echoing scream, the mutated Chimera vice-chairman plummeted 1,000 feet. From the top of the citadel, crashing into the empty concrete plaza below with a cataclysmic thud that silenced the entire battlefield. Arthur turned his back on the broken balcony and looked toward the far end of the penthouse. Behind a set of heavy, runic double doors lined with ancient gold, a suffocating, terrifying pressure began to leak into the room. It wasn't modern hunter mana. It was the ancient, primordial aura of an entity that had lived for centuries. The runic doors slowly slid open. Sitting upon a massive obsidian throne in the center of an ancient celestial chamber sat Grand Master Cassius. In the center of the room, hovering above a massive pool of boiling golden mercury, was an ancient, triangular stone artifact pulsing with cosmic alien light, the constellation Conduit. Cassius looked at Arthur, his braided silver beard glowing with 9 golden rings of pure ninth circle divine power. "You always were an arrogant pest, Lucas Vance." Cassius's voice resonated like rolling thunder, shaking the very foundations of the skyscraper. "You conquered my legions, you killed my vice-chairman. But you still don't understand why the hegemony rules this world." Cassius raised his hand, and the ancient stone conduit ignited with a pillar of blinding violet light that tore a hole straight through the ozone layer. "Into the void of deep space. We do not serve human logic, Lucas. We serve the constellation of the boundless void, and to a god who created this universe. Your little glass bottles are nothing more than dust. When a mortal reaches the 9th circle of magic, they can summon tidal waves and summon meteor storms from the upper atmosphere. But when a 9th circle Grand Master opens an ancient constellation conduit, they aren't summoning magic anymore. They are opening a backdoor into the cosmic server of the universe, through the tier in the ceiling of the 100th floor penthouse. The night sky over New Seoul cracked open like shattered obsidian. A colossal, terrifying presence descended through the stratosphere. It had no face, no flesh, and no voice. It was an undulating, kilometer-wide vortex of swirling starlight, cosmic dust, and billions of watching, unblinking celestial eyes. The ambient gravity in the room tripled, then quadrupled, then multiplied by 10. The reinforced steel pillars supporting the 100-story skyscraper began to groan in mechanical agony. Elena Cross and the Silver Dawn Hunters who had just breached the 99th floor fell to their knees, blood dripping from their noses as the cosmic aura pressed down upon their souls. With the weight of an entire collapsing moon. Warning: apocalyptic hazard detected, anomalous entity intervening, constellation of the boundless void tier, Universal Overseer Class 9 Cosmic Entity. System warning: all mortal stats, skills, and alchemical formulas are subject to celestial deletion. Grand Master Cassius floated 3 feet above his obsidian throne, bathed in the blinding, radiant violet light of the cosmic portal. His white beard whipped wildly in the gravitational gale, his eyes glowing with maniacal religious ecstasy. "Look upon your doom, Lucas Vance," Cassius screamed over the howling storm. "For 300 years I served the constellations. I kept humanity weak. I hoarded the true medicine. And I culled anyone who dared to unlock the forbidden sciences. Also, the great ones would grant me eternal life. You thought your little physics tricks could change the world. To a constellation, your entire planet is just a petri dish waiting to be wiped clean." From the center of the cosmic vortex, a massive spear composed of pure, crystallized antimatter, capable of vaporizing a continental tectonic plate, began to descend, aimed squarely at the top of the citadel. The entire world watched through orbital satellites as the sky over Korea ignited with the light of a miniature supernova. Arthur Lowell stood in the center of the shattered penthouse. His clothes were torn by the atmospheric winds, his black hair danced across his forehead. But his eyes were completely, terrifyingly tranquil. There was no fear in his stance. There was no hesitation in his breath. Instead, Arthur slowly unbuttoned the cuffs of his sleeves, rolled them up to his forearms, and extended both hands toward the descending cosmic god. "A Petri dish," Arthur chuckled, a sound that cut through the thunderous cosmic roar like a razor-sharp scalpel. "Cassius, you spent 5 centuries on your knees begging alien parasites for scraps of lifespan, calling them gods. You never understood what an alchemist truly is." Arthur's eyes flared with a blinding, iridescent gold that eclipsed the violet glow of the portal. The liquid law engine, primordial unleashing, recognizing soul authority, supreme sovereign alchemist. Overclocking crucible to 1000% efficiency, target acquired, the fabric of the void itself. "An alchemist," Arthur whispered, his voice resonating through the quantum frequencies of the cosmos, "is someone who looks at the universe, rejects its limitations, and forces reality into a glass bottle." Arthur extended his right hand toward the descending antimatter spear, and his left hand toward the celestial vortex in the sky. Extracting abstract concept, celestial eternity and divine authority, extracting physical constant, subatomic weak force and mass energy equivalents. Extracting metaphysical phenomenon, the concept of existence itself. In the palm of Arthur's hand, the greatest alchemical miracle in human history began to take shape. He wasn't using glass. The glass of modern mortals was too weak to contain the brew. Instead, Arthur extracted the physical concept of absolute spacetime, folding a 4-dimensional pocket of reality into the shape of a crystalline, multifaceted triangular prism between his fingers. And inside that impossible prism, 3 swirling streams of liquid, pure gold, abyssal void black, and blinding stellar white, fused together in a violent, beautiful alchemical dance. Synthesis complete. The draft of True Genesis, Tier 5 X-Rank Primordial. Ingredients: 1x stolen divine authority, 1x antimatter vector, 1x universal freedom. Effect: overwrites local cosmic administrator privileges. For 120 seconds, the user is not a participant in the universe. The user is the author of its physical laws. "Impossible," Cassius choked, his eyes bulging until the blood vessels ruptured in his sclera. He bottled the constellation's authority. He put a god in a flask." Arthur looked at the small, glowing prism in his hand. "Cheers," Arthur smiled. He tossed the entire draft of True Genesis back into his throat, swallowing the universe-shattering nectar. In a single, effortless gulp, BABOOM, a shockwave of pure, geometric golden light detonated from Arthur's chest, blasting the clouds, the storm, and the gravitational pressure out of the atmosphere for 10,000 miles in every direction. Arthur's stats didn't just increase, they completely shattered the digital framework of the system. System framework, OVERWRITTEN. Strength, undefined, infinity, agility, absolute instantaneity, constitution, immutable cosmological constant, title acquired, the sovereign alchemist of the primordial law. Arthur stepped forward. He didn't run. He didn't jump. He simply folded the space between himself and Grand Master Cassius to exactly 0 millimeters, appearing instantly in front of the floating 9th Circle Chancellor. Cassius frantically unleashed 9 layers of SSS-rank Supreme Dragon barriers, screaming in pure terror. "Stay away from me. I am the immortal ruler of the hegemony. I cannot die." Arthur raised his right index finger, coated in a single shimmering drop of liquid reality deletion, and gently tapped the center of Cassius's 9 legendary shields. Ping. The 9 SSS-rank barriers didn't break. They simply ceased to have ever existed in the timeline. Arthur's finger continued forward, pressing lightly against the center of Cassius's forehead. "Your 9 circles of mana are revoked," Arthur said softly. "Your 500 years of stolen lifespan are refunded to the earth, and your legacy is erased." Concept applied, instant temporal culmination. "NOOOO." Cassius shrieked as 5 centuries of accumulated chronological debt flooded his biological vessel in a single microsecond. His skin dried into brittle parchment, his teeth turned to gray powder. His luxurious white robes collapsed over a skeletal frame, and in less than 3 seconds, the legendary Grand Master who had ruled the world from the shadows for 300 years disintegrated into a handful of lifeless gray dust that blew away in the morning wind. Arthur didn't even look down at the dust. He turned his eyes toward the sky, looking directly into the cosmic vortex of the constellation of the boundless void. The massive entity, which had terrified humanity for centuries, was now actively trembling, its celestial eyes dilating in sheer, cosmic horror, as it realized that the mortal standing below had just consumed one of its own limbs as an alchemical ingredient. "You have 10 seconds to close that portal and leave this solar system forever." Arthur's voice echoed across the multiversal void, cold, unyielding, and carrying the authority of an apex sovereign. "If I ever see your eyes in the sky above this world again, I won't just bottle your authority. I will brew your entire dimension into fertilizer for my garden." The celestial entity didn't need to be told twice. With a desperate, frantic screech of tearing dimensions, the massive cosmic vortex collapsed inward, snapping shut like a terrified turtle, pulling its head into its shell, leaving the sky above New Sol clear, blue, and bathed in the radiant golden warmth of the rising morning sun. 2 weeks later, the towering glass citadel in Sector 1 had undergone a complete transformation. The gold-trimmed corporate logos of Verida's apothecary had been dismantled, replaced by a simple, elegant marble crest, the global open pharmacopoeia. Thousands of free educational alchemical textbooks, written personally by Arthur Lowell, were distributed to every school, clinic, and dungeon guild across the globe. For the first time in human history, healing potions were free, mana elixirs were taught as basic science, and the arbitrary class caps that had chained humanity to corrupt guilds were shattered forever. Standing on the highest observation balcony of the newly christened citadel, Arthur leaned against the railing with a cup of warm tea in his hand, looking out over the flourishing, peaceful skyline of New Sol. Behind him, Elena Cross walked out onto the terrace, wearing the sleek, white-and-silver commander uniform of the newly formed Continental Defense League. "Master Arthur," Elena said with a bright, respectful smile, "the first shipment of universal detox elixirs has arrived in South America and Europe. The mortality rate in F-rank and D-rank dungeon raids has dropped to absolute 0% worldwide." "Good," Arthur smiled, taking a sip of his tea. Medicine was never meant to be a weapon of control. It was meant to make sure nobody has to die with their face in the dirt. Elena stood beside him, looking up at the young man who had rewritten the laws of the universe with a handful of glass bottles. "And what will you do now, Master Arthur? The constellations have retreated, the hegemony is gone, and you are the undisputed sovereign of this world." Arthur looked at the empty glass teacup in his hand, a mischievous, familiar smirk playing across his lips, as a tiny, iridescent drop of cosmic law began to swirl at the bottom of the porcelain. "What else?" Arthur chuckled, his dark eyes gleaming with boundless ambition. "There are still thousands of undiscovered dimensions out there, and an infinite number of natural laws waiting to be bottled. And that brings our massive, complete story of the cursed alchemist, who created potions that defied natural laws to its epic conclusion. If you were completely captivated by Arthur's journey from a discarded F-rank slave porter to the absolute sovereign of reality, be sure to check out the other epic Manhwa recaps and overpowered progression fantasy stories, available right now on the Fate Library channel. We have full-length, binge-worthy sagas waiting for you on the screen right now, so click on the next video and let's keep the adventure going.